This is the Living Schoolyards Act lecture series. We're exploring the benefits to health, education, community, and climate. Next slide. I'm Nancy Striniste, Green Schoolyard America's National Policy Liaison, and I'm joined by my Green Schoolyards America colleagues, Rachel Pringle, who will be managing the chat, and Dante Sudilovsky, who is running our tech today. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Next slide. The Living Schoolyards Act is a groundbreaking bill that will direct important federal resources towards transforming school grounds into living schoolyards, richly layered outdoor environments that strengthen local ecological systems while providing place-based, hands-on learning resources for students of all ages. It is incredibly exciting to see this bill in the federal record. This is a huge opportunity to equitably improve the educational experiences and health of children all across the country, as well as realize climate and ecological and community benefits. Next slide. Some background. The Living Schoolyards Act was introduced in the US Senate by Martin Heinrich of New Mexico in September of 22. Senator Heinrich is going to reintroduce the bill in the next few weeks in the Senate, and Representative Gabe Vasquez, also of New Mexico, will introduce it in the House. Right now, what we need is bipartisan co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate. So please reach out to your senators and congresspeople. There is a link to the 2022 bill on our webpage, which there should be a link in the chat for that. And it's currently undergoing some rewrites. Next slide. The goals of this lecture series are first to build a grassroots community of active support for the bill. We know we've discussed in the past two lectures that learning outdoors on living schoolyards is a powerfully engaging way to improve children's academic experiences and physical and mental health. We believe that every child deserves the opportunity for hands-on experiential learning in the out of doors. As we will discuss today and in subsequent lectures in this series, living schoolyards also offer tremendous climate and ecological benefits, as well as providing community green spaces and creating green jobs. The next goal of the lecture series is to unite and grow our coalition of organizations. Within the coalition we are building around this bill, there's a huge amount of knowledge, expertise, and on-the-ground experience. This lecture series is bringing us together and drawing on that expertise. And of course, the main goal is to highlight the many benefits of living schoolyards and to create a library of recorded testimony. This library is going to be available to be used by elected officials and their staffs to understand the benefits of this legislation, but it can also be used at any time anyone needs to advocate and educate about the benefits of living schoolyards. Next slide. You can support the Living Schoolyards Act. Go to our webpage and join the coalition of endorsers on the bill. We are almost at 150 coalition member organizations, and we need more. Senator Heinrich will cite this support when he introduces the bill. We have been told that when House and Senate offices get lots of emails, calls, and letters, especially on the same day, they take notice. There is contact information and letter writing templates on the web page, so let's let them hear from us. You can also share our student toolkit with kids that you know and encourage them to write. Student letters have a huge impact. You can follow us on social media and share our posts or post about the act yourself and tag us. We encourage you to write an op-ed in your local paper. And finally, you can visit the offices of your senators and representatives in Congress and tell them and their staff members about the bill and how much it would mean to you and to kids, and then tell us about what you've done to support the Living Schoolyards Act. Next slide. What we want to really encourage people to do, especially in May, is to plan a schoolyard tour and invite elected officials and local press. This is a great way to make the case for the value of and the need for living schoolyards and to focus attention on this pending legislation. We have a page on our website for schoolyard tour planning tips, and we're working on a flyer that you will be able to print out and give out at your tours with up-to-date information about the bill. Hopefully it will be introduced by May, reintroduced. And if you have thoughts, experiences, questions about schoolyard tours, please share those in the chat. We want to hear from you. We know there's a lot of expertise out in our audience. Next slide. Oh, let's skip that one today. The first two sessions in this 5-part series focused on the educational and health benefits of living schoolyards. The recordings are available online. Today, our focus shifts to the climate and ecological benefits of living schoolyards and of the act when it becomes law. Our speakers today come from local and national organizations whose work addresses essential habitat for wildlife, watershed protection, and the climate crisis and extreme heat. Together, they bring decades of experience in the field and a wealth of knowledge. Time is always short, and we apologize for limiting their presentations so much. Please read their bios in the chat and follow the incredible work that each of them and their organizations are doing. As you listen to our speakers, feel free to post questions in the chat. The GSA team will respond when we can, and there will be time for the panelists to respond after they all speak. We'll also be posting research links in the chat and afterwards on our website, along with the lecture recordings. First up today is Sharon Danks, the founder and CEO of our organization, Green Schoolyards America. And then we will hear from Lisa Neeb, who is the Green and Healthy Schools Program Manager from an organization called Reflo in Milwaukee. And finally, we'll hear from Liz Soper, who is the Senior Director of K-12 programs at the National Wildlife Federation. So welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It's great to be here. Next slide, please. My name is Sharon Danks, and I'm the CEO and founder of Green Schoolyards America. I'm an environmental city planner by training, and I'll be talking about that specific area of our work today. Next slide, please. First, I wanted to tell you about Green Schoolyards America. We are an organization that inspires and supports systems change to transform asphalt-covered school grounds into living schoolyards that improve children's well-being, learning, and play while strengthening their community's ecological health and climate resilience. We're working to change the paradigm for school ground design, use, and management, so all children will have access to the natural world and the places that they visit every day. Next. So first thing I'd like to talk about is, why do school grounds matter? Next. We have nearly 50 million K-12 students across the country who attend school every day on thousands of square miles of public land. Many of our school grounds look like this and really offer very little to improve the well-being of students, their communities, or the environment. Next. So school grounds across the country need systemic investment in order to be able to reach their potential to be thriving centers for learning, public health, community access to nature, and climate and ecological resilience. Next. The role that school districts play as land managers is incredibly important. They're one of the biggest land managers in every city, and what they do matters. And also greatly impacts the environmental footprint in their cities and the health of children and the community. Next. So I support the Living Schoolyards Act because it'll provide greatly needed investment in school grounds. Oops, next. Yeah. Across the country to help transform asphalt into ecosystems and improve equitable access to green space and shade as temperatures rise due to climate change. Nature-rich environments are healthier for kids in their communities and spark children's curiosity, wonder, and happiness, all of which are extremely important. Next. Cities today face really big problems. We've heard a lot about them in the news lately, and they require interdisciplinary planning to build resilience. creating living schoolyards is a way that schools can participate in repairing these environmental problems on their own land. And the concepts there of like how water systems and climate change and habitat and air quality and health and community interact all come to bear on school grounds. Next. And we can draw on expertise from people in all different fields to help us address these issues. So today, the details that the next slides I'll be talking about are focused on green infrastructure, which is how we can use living systems and other natural processes to help to repair these problems. And so, but I think it's particularly important that we develop green infrastructure as in a child-friendly way that supports, so that we have green infrastructure on school grounds that supports local ecological systems and strengthens wildlife corridors, infiltrates stormwater, cools urban heat islands, and improves air quality at the same time. This picture that we're looking at here was a school that was previously paved and has planted an amazing diversity of a schoolyard forest in its place, and it's grown up over the last 30 years. Next. So when we talk about what the ecological impact is of making green infrastructure on school grounds, I like to think about it in 3 different categories. The one we see the most is a demonstration scale project, which is very valuable for teaching. And that's where we make a small change that illustrates what's being taught in the classroom so that kids can come out and look at a demonstration of how, in this case, in this example, solar panels work. And so the little solar panel on the far left there provides the energy for the pond pump. So that's a demonstration. The larger solar panel in the same picture provides the amount of energy one class uses at that school. So those both are demonstration scale projects that can be taught in science class. At the same school, on the rooftop, there's a solar array that has a school level impact, and it provides 30% or so of the school's annual energy use. And on the far right, the same district has a solar array on another school that provides all of the school's energy on a net zero project, and they're trying to do it at more schools. So that's a district level impact. So thinking about ecological systems projects and what type of impact are you aiming for? How can we scale that up? Next. In stormwater management, rainwater harvesting and stormwater managing can be accomplished on school grounds at a small scale or a large scale, from seasonal garden irrigation systems like the one posted here, like shown in this picture, to rain gardens and entire campuses designed to capture rainfall. There are even whole school districts that we'll hear about, one of which we'll hear about later, that focus on their stormwater and manage stormwater for their city. Next. Wildlife habitats, we can turn school grounds into important habitat for native plants and wildlife. And when we coordinate this at the district level, we can contribute to local habitat conservation plans and tie into protecting local species, providing corridors for wildlife, foraging areas. And this is particularly easier to do for birds and butterflies. Next, on a schoolyard anyway. And then climate resilience is also incredibly important. We can use trees and shrubs to provide shade where children will be using it during the school day. And trees can also shade school buildings to reduce sun exposure, urban heat island effects, interior cooling costs, and things like that. Next. And it's because we have so many schoolyards that look like this and have absolutely no shade, we really need to be working on climate resilience and adaptation for our schools. Next. There are many types of climate disruptions that are appearing, and it's time to take action in the places that we can do so. The types of climate change impacts that we see and that impact schools directly are extreme heat and wildfires, extreme levels of precipitation and also drought, habitat and biodiversity loss, air quality problems, and sea level rise. And in this picture, it's an example of sea level rise problems. There are some problems that are much more difficult, like this one, to address at the school level. And in this case, the school was built onto fill into the San Francisco Bay, which is slowly coming back and making their school grounds wet again. So we question whether some schools are in the coming years, in the coming decades, might be in a place that isn't compatible with the large scale shifts that are happening. And for the purpose of this, the rest of this discussion, I'm I know that many of the problems like this are so big. We're going to focus on the ones that we can address on a site. Just wanted to acknowledge that this exists. Next. So extreme heat is a problem that all schools can start taking action for, and the remedies are very simple. They involve trees. Millions of children across the country don't have any shade, and this directly impacts children's health and well-being. And so schools across the country need to adapt their grounds to respond to climate change and protect children who are particularly vulnerable to high temperatures from extreme heat. Next. And this is also an equity issue, and tree canopy equity is essential. Most schools could use more trees, but the lack of shade is particularly urgent in places that currently have the fewest trees, the hottest present and future climates, and in underserved communities. Next. We've been conducting research over the last 5 years or so to take measurements of school ground surface temperatures, to look and document how the choices we make in selecting building materials and planting materials impacts the microclimates on our school grounds and contributes to urban heat island effects. And we've recorded temperatures as high as 166 degrees on, for example, poured in place rubber. Plastic grass is also incredibly hot. Next. So making choices that the material choices that schools put into their grounds matter from a climate perspective. Unshaded asphalt, plastic grass, rubber surfaces, increase temperatures on school grounds and contribute to urban heat island effects. So we recommend that we avoid these materials, particularly if your school ground is already hot. Next. And here's some examples, an example of what that looks like when you take a photo of a school ground with an infrared heat-oriented camera, and you can see different materials radiating or absorbing different amounts of heat and registering different temperatures. And so on this particular day in Berkeley, California, we had an 81-degree day. And on that day, the difference in the surfaces, rubber was 133 degrees, the asphalt was 107, and the grass was 83. So you can see that by making different material choices, the area near those surfaces themselves were those temperatures, but children who are shorter and who are closer to the ground are affected greatly by the surfaces too. Next. And having shade also helps to mitigate the effects of some of the material choices. So shade matters, and on the same day in the same place, an unshaded asphalt was 106 degrees in this picture, and in the shade, it was 73. So in this case, it was 33 degrees cooler with the shade of a tree. And so it's important to add shade trees where the kids are. We've also been creating a map of California schoolyards to figure out what the baseline is. Where are we now? In our state, we have 9% tree canopy across all of the 10,000 schools in the state. But we also know that more than 2 million students go to school with less than 5% tree canopy on their property, meaning there's millions of children who don't have access to shade. Next. And when we're counting that shade, a lot of it is at the curb where the adults like to look at it, and it's not actually shading the children. So we need to also be thinking about our tree placement and putting it where the kids can access it during the school day. Next. And so to work on this problem, we have co-founded the California Schoolyard Forest System with California Forestry Department called CAL FIRE and the California Department of Education and our fellow nonprofit 10 Strands. And it's a statewide initiative to increase tree canopy on public school grounds across California to directly shade and protect pre-K-12 students from extreme heat and rising temperatures due to climate change. And California is the first state in the national schoolyard forest system we're also working on. Next. So the National Schoolyard Forest System has a new resource library I wanted to tell you about. It has materials that schools can use for planting, using and maintaining schoolyard forests, and it will help you make the case and do design and implementation and maintenance, and has resources for educators. We'll be expanding it over time. Next. And one example for those in California, we have a climate adapted tree planting palette. It's regional types of trees that looks at trees that are suitable now and will also be thriving in 2100 when temperatures are hotter. Next. And so the big picture in conclusion is that school grounds are really important. Public land devoted to children is precious and it's really in short supply. We need to use it wisely and ensure that green infrastructure on school grounds directly benefits children, responds to their needs, while also meeting the ecological goals to fix these large scale problems. Next. The time to invest is now. Living schoolyards, when we have living schoolyards and environmental and climate literacy, we get an investment in the future health and well-being of our children, our communities, and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That was amazing. And next, we'd like to welcome Lisa Neeb from the Green and Healthy Schools Program Manager from Reflo in Milwaukee. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. So as Nancy said, I am from Milwaukee. So with the nonprofit Reflo, we're an environmental nonprofit that works on community-based water projects and providing equitable solutions using green infrastructure and other sustainability efforts to help increase social, economic, and environmental benefits in our communities by partnering with many community organizations and partners to make these things happen. We have several different program areas that work together with on-the-ground projects to advance these different goals and initiatives that we support, one of which is Green and Healthy Schools, which is where I focus my time and efforts. As the program manager and also an environmental educator, I get to spend a lot of time working with schools and teachers and educating young people to build that connection to nature, as well as build environmental and Great Lakes literacy using the projects that are built within Milwaukee. We also have an innovative placemaking program that works to activate vacant spaces throughout the city of Milwaukee using green infrastructure as the base and lots of other engagement opportunities for the community. We share personal and community stories and relationships to water through our Milwaukee Water Stories program, have supported rainwater harvesting and urban ag to bring healthy food access to community members and activate spaces throughout the city. And then we also have an environmental internship program that helps support young people in high school who are interested in blue-green careers and give them hands-on experience with land conservation, sustainability initiatives, and really empower these young folks to advance their knowledge in climate justice and climate education and different sustainability areas where they're passionate and they have an interest, and we help connect them with the resources to build those skills as they move forward through and past high school. Next. So with our Green and Healthy Schools program, as Sharon said, too many of our urban schoolyards look like that upper left photo where there is just vast amounts of impervious surface and very little inspiring or connected opportunities for children to be in green space, to have shade, to have any of those positive interactions with the environment that they are so seeking and are so beneficial for their different social emotional needs and curricular connections. And so our work through the Green and Healthy Schools program really helps to take these large, uninspiring, impervious spaces and use green infrastructure and many other elements, including outdoor classrooms and improved recreation features, as an opportunity to create these beautiful living green schoolyards that give so many co-benefits to the children of the schools that we work with, in addition to the community at large. In Milwaukee, we're really lucky because the schoolyards are not closed off to the public. They are open to anyone in the community who would like to come outside of school time hours. And so we really try to work with stakeholders, from young children that attend the school, families, community partners, elected officials, anyone in the community who has a potential use and interest in this space, to gather their ideas to make these living schoolyards as accessible as possible for folks and to meet as many of their individual needs as possible. In effort to help promote these schoolyards and all of the impacts and benefits of the work that's happening in our city, there is also the Green Schools Consortium of Milwaukee, which is a consortium led by Reflo, where we bring together members of our community. We have about 1,300 folks who do resource sharing and peer networking and come together for a conference every year. where we really get to inspire each other with stories, share lessons learned, and help to grow the movement supporting green and healthy schools. So the Living Schoolyards Act is such a wonderful complement to the work that's happening in Milwaukee, and is really a wonderful funding opportunity to help continue that momentum and that growth that's been happening for over a decade in our city. And so by supporting the Living Schoolyards Act, it's supporting all the things that we are very passionate about that are impacting our children, our neighborhoods, and our communities throughout our city and our region. Next. So to give a little more context to Milwaukee, we are right on the western coast of Lake Michigan. We have 3 main rivers that feed into Lake Michigan that carry along the way all of the pollutants and things that the water carries as it moves across our land. We are the largest city in the state of Wisconsin and the most urban. And we have a combined and a separated sewer system that's helping to manage the stormwater and the gray water that is used within our communities. Due to aging infrastructure, more intense rain events, more intense flooding events, our city has seen very detrimental impacts because of those changes in more severe weather and the fact that our infrastructure is not able to manage those influxes of water. With us being so close to Lake Michigan, it's really important that we have strategies in place to try and mitigate that flood risk, as well as to improve the water quality before it ends up back into Lake Michigan and one of our most precious freshwater resources that we have in the country. So based on work that many partners have been doing in Milwaukee, there was a 2022 Milwaukee Flood and Health Vulnerability Assessment that looked at flood risk and lots of different socioeconomic factors in our city. And they found that there is a locus where social vulnerability intersects with flood vulnerabilities. And so there is even more reason to be directing our efforts to producing or to reducing impervious surfaces, using green infrastructure strategies and other ways to mitigate that flood risk and provide the social and health benefits for the people who live in our city by managing that stormwater and helping to reduce those risks. 1 second. On this map, you'll see like the outline is the city of Milwaukee, and there are lots of little dots that are representing different green schoolyards that Reflo and our project partners support. Some of those schoolyards are in the separated sewer, some are within the combined, and based on their location throughout the city, there are different strategies that we use to improve that water quality and help to reduce the overflows that might be happening in Lake Michigan when our sewer systems are overloaded. We do partner very closely with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, who has a regional green infrastructure plan that calls for 0 basement backups, so reduced flooding, and 0 sewer overflows into the lake by 2035. And so all of the green infrastructure efforts that we're doing on schoolyards, in addition to those throughout the community, are helping for all of us to work towards meeting that goal to provide a much healthier and sustainable world for us in Milwaukee. Next. So green infrastructure, again, a strategy that's going to help to capture the water where it falls, help to improve the water quality in a more natural means than just hitting an impervious surface. So this is an image of a schoolyard in Milwaukee that has a central island that has a main focus of green infrastructure. We have several bioswales in those spaces. There are pathways, there are outdoor classrooms situated near those green infrastructures, so we can use them as learning opportunities and ways to engage our young folks so they can learn about not only nature, but also the strategies and water connections to their community to understand how and where that water is flowing and ways that we can work to make sure that we're keeping our environment as clean as we can. Next slide. So to also set the stage for why Milwaukee, this map is showing Milwaukee Public Schools. So that is the largest district in the state of Wisconsin. They serve over 70,000 students in 150 schools. And so with with all of these schoolyards comes a massive opportunity to work to transform those very impervious gray spaces into living schoolyards. As Sharon, you mentioned, school districts own a lot of land. MPS is no different. There's over 500 acres of impervious surface that is owned by the district, and by working on a district-wide approach of schoolyard redevelopment, we're helping to transform a portion of that imperviousness and provide all of these other amenities and learning opportunities, outdoor spaces, recreational improvements, green space, trees, all these wonderful things that are benefiting our children, our communities, and helping to reduce those risks of flood by improving stormwater, or by improving water quality and bringing biodiversity back to our schoolyards for our children and our communities to enjoy. Next. So this slide is a school that we have worked with. This is Longfellow School on the south side of Milwaukee. And I like this slide because you can kind of see from the perspective where the water is naturally flowing. So when we partner with a school, all schools are selected through an equitable process that's supported by the Green Schools Consortium of Milwaukee. So this school was selected by a large consortium of folks based on need and enthusiasm. And when we bring these schools together, one of the first things we do is we do site assessments to kind of identify where the water is flowing, what some major elements might be needed to help manage that stormwater, and then start to build in the other elements that support the holistic project. And often there is parking lots right next to the schoolyard. So you see, contaminants and pollutants that come off from the parking lot flowing onto the schoolyard, and figuring out that flow of water is really important so we can identify which strategy to place where and how we can build in the co-benefits for learning and social emotional connections as the project progresses. Next. So these are some images of different types of infrastructure that we use in our projects in Milwaukee, and it really depends on, site size, where the water is flowing, if they're in the combined versus the separated sewer. There's lots of different considerations that are taken into account as the design develops, but they all focus on removing asphalt and putting in green infrastructure, green spaces that are helping to do what nature wants to do. It allows the water to infiltrate, it allows the plants to clean it, and it allows for all these really engaging spaces for our children and our communities to connect with. We often put in large underground cisterns to act as extra storage for groundwater or for stormwater to help reduce the chance of overflows in our sewer systems. We do a lot of native prairies with Wisconsin native plants that are built to absorb the water and clean the water before it enters back into a local river or into the sewer system. We have a large tree and reforestation effort that is moving throughout our city as part of our projects as well. On the next slide, we'll see an aerial image of a high school. This is Vincent High School, which is a very unique site. Most schools in our area do not look like this, but they have 70 acres of land and they have an agriculture focus. And so part of the work of their redevelopment was putting in an arboretum that you can see those circles of trees in the front. So there's a lot of diversity in that space that can be used in lots of different curricular ways, as well as for calm down and mindfulness and nature walks and things like that. And all those teeny tiny little red dots that you see are actually a 2,700 tree hardwood forest that was planted as part of this project. And so we're investing in these projects long-term with lots of maintenance considerations to continue to build these living spaces for folks to enjoy for decades to come. Next slide. These are a couple other green infrastructure strategies that we use. That top left is showing a bioswale at a local school where the water actually runs down that little river conveyance on the left-hand side into a bioswale that will hold the water after a rain and then slowly infiltrate into the ground. Beneath that bioswale and that outdoor classroom that's situated right near it is also an underground cistern, helping to provide that additional storage and management of the water. We often will put in different green spaces. The picture on the right-hand top is actually a school called Allenfield Elementary that had a green space previously, but it wasn't graded appropriately. It had a lot of ponding and things like that. And through redevelopment, we were able to help fix those issues to let water flow where it naturally wants to flow, and have some other management strategies in place so kids can enjoy that vast lawn and have lots of different gameplay and different connections out there, but still allowing water to do what water naturally wants to do. And then we have been upping our game on the number of trees that are going on in schoolyards with more and more with each cohort of projects that we bring on each year. And then we also do some rainwater harvesting, depending on what the school is interested in. But this is again at the agriculture high school, where they actually use the water harvested to help water their animals and take care of their crops and things like that. Next slide. So this is one school example of the before and after. So again, this is Bayview Montessori. You can see that very vast, open, uninspiring, impervious gray space. And after working with the school for more than 3 years, moving through a multi-phase redevelopment process, we see what's on the next slide. A very different, much more green living schoolyard that is still allowing for some of the recreational things that are important on some hardscape, but has removed a majority of it to put in lawn and outdoor classrooms and multiple bioswales, cisterns, native prairies, nature play areas, and giving so much more opportunity for engagement, for learning connections, for mindfulness connections, and really giving a very place-based approach for teaching about our connections to the environment and water and helping to protect our resources. Next slide. These are just a couple examples of students actually interacting with different infrastructure that's on their schoolyard. And so we often will do environmental education programs at schools. We'll do teacher professional development to help them feel comfortable and understand their spaces so they can share that with children. And so we'll lead tours and walk kids right through the bioswales, nature hikes, do stormwater tree assessments to try and understand why the species of tree is selected over another and what their value is from a stormwater retention standpoint, all sorts of connections to nature through science observations and other STEAM connections. Next slide. And then really focusing not only on the teaching aspects, but on the aspects of play that green infrastructure can provide to young people, and really helping them to feel comfortable in these spaces, exploring and learning and building these connections throughout the different seasons, especially here in Wisconsin, even going outside during the winter time to experience these different spaces. And then really just trying to bring green infrastructure to life. This bottom picture on the right, we have a model that demonstrates imperviousness and then how the water flows through different substrates and into an underground cistern to help bring that green infrastructure to life, because often so much is happening underground that people don't quite understand all of the pieces and the parts and how the things work. So we're trying to build a bridge to help them see what's above ground and below ground and the connection between their water and the environment. Next slide, I'll be best. And then lastly, for learning opportunities, not only is it for the children who enjoy these spaces when they're in school, there are lots of different environmental groups in Milwaukee that do land conservation work, that focus on green infrastructure, learning about maintenance and construction and the building of these projects. And so we work really hard to bring young people to these projects, to give them some of that work development skill and help them explore their personal interests in sustainability and land conservation, so they have some some concrete examples and experiences in these fields that they can consider moving into a blue-green career after they move past high school. And then next slide. So currently, there are 36 schools in the Milwaukee Public Schools district that Reflo and partners are supporting through these schoolyard redevelopment projects. To date, 19 of those have been constructed. So these are some of our stats that show the value of those projects that has been raised through grants, how much asphalt's been removed, stormwater capture, as well as the number of trees, and over 15,000 people in our community that are impacted by these projects every single day. And these numbers are only going to continue to grow as we move forward with projects in the future. We bring 5 projects on every year, and based on the City and County of Milwaukee's Climate and Equity Plan, they are calling for us to double the impact each year, which would bring us up to 10 schools. And so the Living Schoolyards Act is so vitally important for us to have that funding, the policy, the support to really bring these things to a reality. So thank you so much.
Wow, that was incredible. Thank you so much, Lisa, to hear about the work that your organization is doing and what a model you are for the nation. Thank you. And our next speaker, our final speaker today is Liz Soper, who is the Senior Director of K-12 Programs at the National Wildlife Federation. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks, Nancy. I really can't think of a better place to be during Earth Week than on a webinar like this and speaking about living school grounds. Next. So as Nancy said earlier, I'm Liz Soper. I work for National Wildlife Federation as their Senior Director of Education. And from an organizational basis, the Living Schoolyard Act embodies much of what NWF is really trying to accomplish across the nation. And NWF does truly support this legislation because it meets the need to create resilient and just places for people and wildlife. And this relates directly to NWF's core goals, no doubt, in terms of protecting wildlife and their habitat and connecting people to nature. And in this case, primarily kids. I'm sure all of you out there know the issue with kids spending just way too much time indoors, over 8 hours spent indoors, probably behind screens, gotten even worse during COVID, with almost no time outside for nature. Next. So NWF has been working to reverse this trend through our long-standing schoolyard habitat program. And this program has been in existence since 1996. We work with different school communities across the country to restore native habitat, provide equitable access to nature, and create outdoor classrooms for learning across the curriculum. We currently have about 10,000 different schools that have been certified under this program, which is part of NWF's larger Garden for Wildlife program. Our Garden for Wildlife program, I think to date, has close to 275,000 certified habitats, working both with residential homeowners, with businesses, and with whole communities. So schools are part of that as well. Next. So, of course, I'm with National Wildlife Federation, has been asked to focus on the importance of living schoolyards for wildlife and enhancing biodiversity. And there's no doubt that wildlife need our help across the board, across the country. As many of you know, there is a worldwide biodiversity crisis. A 2019 UN report found that around 1 million plant and animal species are now threatened with extinction, and this is just within the next few decades. Our ecosystems are strongest when they're rich in the variety of native species that belong here, and they're weakest when biodiversity declines and we lose species. Living schoolyards can help to enhance biodiversity and support local wildlife, especially in urban landscapes. So you can see here on the left is a school grounds. It's a courtyard before they did any kind of landscaping for wildlife. And on the right, just how much more diversity there is and
ultimately how much more biodiversity. Next slide. So I just wanted to comment a little bit about some research that's been done, a 4-year study by the National Science Foundation called the American Residential Macro System, Yard Futures. And NWF was a part of this research program. It was actually looking at some of our certified habitats. And what they found was that research shows that gardening for wildlife, which basically means creating native wildlife habitats and communities, if adopted on a wider scale, can help boost biodiversity, which is pretty straightforward, but it was really nice to hear and see this as part of an extensive research project, especially in urban areas where there's so much lawn and other pretty sterile environments. So if we're able to create more of these landscapes, even on school grounds, we can increase the biodiversity of communities. Next. As well, these properties can connect corridors of habitat necessary for many of our migratory species. So if these areas are planted with a rich diversity of what we call native plants and trees, we're really supplying the food chain for insects and the animals who depend upon them. So the more living schoolyards we can develop across the country, the better chances we have to enhance and support healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. Next. So what is it that wildlife basically need to survive? It's the same things that you and I all need to survive. The 4 important components of habitat that wildlife and humans need to survive include food, water, cover, and places to raise young. Knowing that wildlife need all of these components and needs some combination of these 4, the best way to ensure success is to basically mimic nature. Next. So native plants, again, are an essential component of any living schoolyard. Native flowers, trees, grasses, and shrubs provide more food and cover for local wildlife because they evolve together. For instance, just one native oak tree can support over 550 species of butterflies and moss. So that's pretty impressive compared to maybe the picture on the right, which is just generally lawn that's sterile. It's got weed killers on it, pesticides on it, and takes a lot of water to happen. So the more that we can create habitats with native plants, we're helping wildlife to survive and deal with some of the other issues that both Sharon and Lisa were talking about. Okay, next. So living schoolyards can also support endangered habitats like the one you see here, which is the pine rockland habitat in Miami-Dade County in Florida. Historically, pine rockland habitat has covered over 185,000 acres. But if you've been to Miami recently or down in the Broward County area, you'll know there's a lot of development. So today, this type of habitat, this ecosystem that is so critical, less than 1% of it remains. This habitat actually supports over 400 native plant species and dozens of native animal species, including the endangered Miami blue butterfly that you see here up in the right-hand corner, and the rare butterflies such as the Atala hair streak butterfly. So this school is Royal Palm Elementary. It's created about 3 or 4 of these sites on its school grounds, and Miami-Dade County is working within the school system to try to create a corridor of this pine rockland habitat throughout the system. Next, please. Another great example of living schoolyards where you can look at an ecosystem approach is in the Midwest. And I think that Lisa spoke a little bit about this, where schools have focused on creating larger scale living schoolyards, such as a native prairie habitat. Historically, again, native prairie habitat covered almost 1/3 of America, but right now it's about 4% of its original area. This really makes it one of the most rare and endangered habitats and ecosystems in the world. So the more that we can plant these native prairie habitats in areas that it makes sense, where it's native, we can help the little prairie dogs here down in the right-hand corner. Next. So when it comes to creating living schoolyards, location doesn't matter. Whether you're in an urban, suburban, or rural area, creating a living schoolyard will help your community to restore your local environment. Next. So for instance, green schoolyards on rooftops help support wildlife by giving urban concrete jungles a dose of green space. They're perfect for attracting birds, squirrels, and serve as a great stopover for many of our migrating species. Next. And as well, size or scale doesn't matter. Of course, scale at the level where you saw on a previous slide, the prairie is going to have a bigger impact for sure. But even the smallest of green schoolyards can support wildlife and increase biodiversity. A school may only have a small courtyard, a side alley, or even a few containers, but they still can support important species such as pollinators. Next. So this is why every living schoolyard is important, and why it is so important to pass the Living Schoolyard Act. This legislation will help school communities to pay for, to plan, and to implement living schoolyards across the country. And to summarize, living schoolyards can play, again, an important role in addressing the biodiversity crisis, providing ecological benefits and supporting wildlife in our communities. Not only are wildlife supported through these habitats, but our students are connected to nature, becoming stewards of the environment and wildlife. And I'll just end it here with Doug Tallamy's quote. Doug is a pretty famous American entomologist and ecologist and conservationist, has written a bunch of really great books. You should just Google him and look it up. But he says, garden as if life depends on it, because basically it does. Thank you.
Well, huge gratitude to our incredible speakers today. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, all three of you. We're going to take some time to answer some of the questions that you've posted in the chat right now, and this is going to be facilitated by Rachel Pringle from Green Schoolyards. Rachel?
Great, thank you so much. And yes, we have received some questions in the chat. And I'll start with the first one here, which is, are there some good examples of schools that have developed a living schoolyard in rural fire-prone areas? There's been some discussion in more rural areas, particularly in California, around defensible space and the issue of wildfires. And so I'm wondering if any of our speakers have some experience at all in making the case for rural schools that might be prone to wildfire.
It's a definitely a good question, and one that the school district should talk to their local fire department about, and to CAL FIRE if it's California wildfires. And most likely would be useful to put the trees and those wildfire prone places away from the building, so that it doesn't cause a fire ladder to the structure. But perhaps there are places on the grounds where it's okay to have trees in any case, because the balance of wildfire risk versus extreme heat depends on where they are as well, I'd say.
One of the biggest questions that has come up, and there's been some discussion in the chat about, is just alternatives to turf. And in particular, during your presentation, Lisa, around rainwater management or stormwater management, and the issues with flooding. And it sounds like there's a lot of people are seeing various different things happening between turf and regular grass and flooding. And what is the discussion out there around alternatives to turf, or how best to manage your grass fields? Just there's a lot there, and wanted to see if any of the speakers have some perspective on that.
So in Milwaukee, like, the strategies it all depends on like the size of the schoolyard and what the intended use is going to be. And so when we can have grass fields, we absolutely put them in. And then we think about some of the management strategies to try and reduce how much water could potentially pool on those spaces. So by adding the crowns in, so the water sheds off of the top, by placing them near, bioswales where the water can naturally like flow into those, or putting in an underground structure to help mitigate that potential of pooling water, we try to do that. There are other porous ground covers, like pavers, and that's not going to be underneath your play space, or EWF, the engineered wood fiber, that's also porous as well. And so there's other maintenance considerations that comes into play, but it it's situational depending, but it's tough to figure out what the right ground cover is, especially on a small site with really high use.
I'd add an example from Berlin, Germany, where about 30 years ago, the city had started with a requirement that every site, I think it's every site in the city, but definitely all the schoolyards have to be able to manage 100% of their own stormwater in the biggest storm that comes in 10 years. That's a lot of stormwater. And so, and they have a fee-based system that charges property owners and managers for impervious surfaces by the square meter. So what happened was 400-ish schools unpaved completely and regraded their grounds and made all of the stormwater that lands in the site stay in the site. And they did leave asphalt in places it was needed, like in their case, sports fields. But those drain into their stormwater management systems on site as well. The building rooftops and the asphalt areas both drain into the playground areas, which are hilly and landscaped, and channel the water into low areas where it can soak in. And that approach too, they went from almost entirely asphalt covered to forest with a giant canopy. And it's our model of one of the best models in the world that I know of how to create incredibly rich play and learning environments that are fantastic green infrastructure for both stormwater and climate and shade. They have some of the best climate resilient schoolyards around. So we're trying to essentially model what Berlin did within our regulatory systems here. But we know that it works. We've seen it, and it's 30 years old there. So we're trying to catch up.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. I think this is always an important one in these discussions, and it's around funding and maintenance. And it says changing an asphalt playground to green space brings much more maintenance. When you work on a school to make these changes, and this was directed particularly at you, at Lisa, but if anybody else has ideas too, do you ensure that the school district will provide the maintenance? Parent volunteers, master gardeners, would love to know how you manage this for long-term success. So Lisa, if you want to start.
So in our particular case, the responsibility of any of the green things that go in is not on building engineers. It is on green team. And so that is the teachers, the parents, the community members, the students who are participating and advocating for those green schoolyards. And so it's a collective effort amongst those folks. The building engineers have certain responsibilities, but they are not to maintain the entire new greenscape that is on the schoolyard. So it's a balancing act. Some schools have relationships with master gardeners. We've been pairing schools with master gardeners and other partners that support gardening and land conservation and things like that as we can, and help develop those relationships. But a lot of our maintenance and land stewardship comes with support from high school interns that take place over the summer. And so our particular organization has a land conservation focus internship in the summer where we go school to school. We provide, maintenance support in those different green infrastructure areas for a number of years until they get established. And then through that process, we continue to work with our school partners to help them build the skills and confidence to maintain those spaces as well.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, Liz, and Sharon. Thank you all for coming. I just wanted to say our next lecture is on Wednesday, May 10th at 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. The focus is going to be on the community and green job benefits, and will feature Danielle Dank of the Trust for Public Land, Jean McCarthy from Outteach, Laura Thompson of Big Green, and Ryan Parker of Food Corps. The series will wrap on May 25th with a focus on green infrastructure and schoolyard design guidelines. Next slide. Please take the information and inspiration from our incredible speakers and reach out today To your senators and representatives, they need to hear from us and they need to understand how important this legislation is to students all across America. Thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.